You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 10th of April, 2025 on Monocle Radio.
Trump's pause on tariffs leaves everybody but China happy for 90 days. Russia pays lip service to a ceasefire while launching a spring offensive in Ukraine. And which tourists would you kick out of your country if you had the choice? I'm Chris Chermak. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. My guests Carole Walker and Tom Rivers will discuss the day's big stories, and we'll hear from the regular host of this show, Andrew Mueller, at the Delphi Economic Forum in Greece. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily and I'm Chris Chermak. We will start with the Delphi Economic Forum in Greece, where Monocle's Andrew Mueller is standing by for us. And Andrew, I want to ask you first of all, the last time we spoke, I believe, was yesterday on the briefing. We started with a weather metaphor, and I wanted to go with another one for you. And I've picked tomorrow's weather for metaphor purposes. A shower in spots in the morning, otherwise sunny periods. Things are looking up a little bit, aren't they?
Things are looking up a little bit, except to the extent that they aren't. I mean, obviously, yesterday the mood was one of bewildered panic about, President Donald Trump's declaration of trade war with pretty much everybody. And today it's just sort of bewilderment in that he has rescinded the trade war a bit, unless, of course, you're from China. But of course, we are now at a point at which everybody is trying to understand, well, if we don't know from one day to the next what the President of the United States is going to do, say, or think, then what the hell kind of world are we living in? So I think that has been pretty much the dominant theme of today's deliberations.
When it comes to that bewilderment, you've been asking a few people about that directly, including Greece's Prime Minister, who I know you've spoken with. What did he have to say?
I did ask him how much fun he was having being the Prime Minister of both an EU and a NATO country just at the moment. His responses were understandably guarded. I think he used phrases like difficult, challenging, and perhaps even more damningly interesting. But he and everybody else in his position are in the most extraordinary bind, in that nobody in Europe wants to lose the transatlantic alliance, but everybody is starting, I think, to understand that you have to think as if it's not going to be there anymore, because even if these tariffs have been scaled back permanently, or even if they're going to be done away with altogether, nobody can plan for anything, not economically, not defensively, not diplomatically, on the basis that the world might be upended from one day to the next on the whim of one man. And for a country like Greece, which has extremely particular defensive imperatives, in that while it is a NATO member, it is, a country which experiences pretty much perennial tensions with another NATO member, i.e. Turkey. And it is also a country for whom, of course, global trade is enormously important. This is a country, small though it is, which controls somewhere between, a fifth and a quarter of all of the world's global shipping. So if its ships don't know from one day to the next whether they're going to be able to dock or how much their companies are going to get stung for if they try, it does make life somewhat difficult.
Andrew, I do understand, though, even as many of the people you speak to there have a bit of bemusement and are wondering exactly how much they can rely on the United States at this point in time, you have also heard some conservative voices offering a rationale.
Or trying to. I mean, I rather get the impression that they are doing an amount of post hoc rationalizing, in that these are people, and these are a couple of voices from American media who've been speaking on and off the record. There's a sense that I think, they've decided that because President Trump is their guy, they therefore have to make excuses. They cannot simply say that, he is a creature of whim and impulse and very arguably has no idea what he's doing. They are trying to apportion some sort of strategic thinking to what he's doing. Myself, I think it is a bit of a reach because I think it is fairly clear that what happened yesterday was he got massively spooked by market reaction and by the fact that the people against whom he declared trade war didn't buckle in quite the way he anticipated he might. I mean, I know that the White House has claimed that 75 countries have been in touch pleading for special deals, but I think the fact that they're not naming any of these 75 countries tells us rather a lot.
Well, finally, Andrew, when you do talk about Europe as well, I mean, there's been a lot happening in Europe also today. We've had a Coalition of the Willing summit, and we're going to be talking about some of that later on this show. But you also have a panel on that precious thing that is EU cohesion tomorrow. What's that about?
Well, it's about exactly that. I mean, it's more about the economics and finance of it. We have Greece's alternate, or which is to say Deputy Minister of National Economy and Finance, the Vice Minister of Finance from Lithuania, and the EU's Director General for Regional and Urban Policy. And so this will be very sort of nuts and bolts policy, but it is all about everything that these people are all trying to do. And, Lithuania is a country I know we've talked about a lot, which has a particular interest in European coherence on defence matters. But everything they're trying to do relies on Europe sticking together and relies on, and this was something else that we spoke about today with the Prime Minister, it relies on countries not attempting to think that they have a more special relationship with the United States than anybody else does and trying to cut a deal on their own. I mean, Mitsotakis seemed pretty clear that he certainly didn't think that he was any such special case. He also seemed pretty confident that no one else in Europe really does at this point either.
Just finally, Andrew, when you do mention Mitsotakis again, there was a massive strike in Greece yesterday. I do understand that now everyone has managed to turn up at the Delphi Economic Forum. Was Mitsotakis a little peeved about that?
I think he understands, I think these things are the cost of doing business. I think he understands the anger that still exists about the train crash 2 years ago, which has become sort of a lightning rod for discontent on a number of fronts. But he mostly sounded pretty confident. He is somebody who has already said that he does intend to campaign as leader of his party in 2027. So he fully intends to go around again if the great people will have him. But yeah, I don't think the timing of yesterday's strike and the fact that this event started yesterday were coincidental. I think the people orchestrating the strike thought that this was a chance to internationalize their disputes with the Greek government. But as far as I can tell, pretty much everybody who hoped to turn up has by now turned up. So we're hoping to speak to a lot more of them tomorrow.
Well, we will let you get back to it, Andrew. Thank you for joining us. That was Andrew Mueller, host of this show and of the Foreign Desk, which you will hear many of the interviews he was speaking about, many more interviews as well on Saturdays. This is the Monocle Daily, and it's time to bring in, well, some of our panel at the moment. I am joined today by Carole Walker, Times radio presenter, political commentator, and former BBC correspondent. And I will soon be joined after train troubles by Tom Rivers, American foreign radio correspondent based in London. But I'm going to start with you, Carole. There is so much we could talk about. Frankly, we could do a whole show by ourselves because there is plenty. But first of all, are you jealous you're not in Delphi at the moment in the sunshine, although it is not actually sunny there at the moment?
Listen, I'm sure it would be absolutely fascinating to be there and be picking up the vibe amongst all those European delegates. And I've never actually been to Delphi, so I'm sure it would be a fascinating place to visit, whatever the weather's like.
It is a beautiful place. I would recommend it to our listeners. It's funny that this kind of conference takes place there because otherwise you have, the Oracle of Delphi, and it is a fascinating place to visit. It's actually not very easy to get to, I can tell you, Carole.
A lot of the best places, you do have to work hard to get there, don't you?
That is absolutely true. Well, we do want to talk a little bit about Donald Trump to start this show, because just when it seemed that markets and political observers had settled into the reality that Trump was serious about tariffs, the U.S. president turned around and hit the pause button, sending markets surging, political leaders around the world gushing in the hopes that their country might be spared a tax on their goods if only they negotiate. It should be said that U.S. stock markets have been falling again today, as I suppose much of the world is still trying to sort out whether we're now back in a tariff-free reality or just a paused one. And Carole, I guess that is the big question at this point. I mean, are you surprised by Trump's turnaround here? It seemed like we had just reached this point where people thought, oh, actually, he's serious.
I don't think anything that Donald Trump does surprises me anymore, because I think what we're realizing is just his sheer unpredictability and the fact that he seems to be operating well beyond all those checks and balances which we kind of fooled ourselves into thinking were a part of American democracy. I think, as Andrew was saying, there has been this sense of bewilderment and uncertainty about what happens next, because, yes, it was a hugely significant move when President Trump popped up, having sent out senior figures from the administration earlier on to insist that the tariffs were here to stay, and announced a 90-day pause on most of them, whilst at the same time ratcheting up the tariffs on China. But what we're left with is a situation where you have got dozens of countries around the world, including the uninhabited, apart from penguins and seals, islands of hurt, which are facing...
Be ecstatic right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they're still on a 10% tariff for anything.
That is fair enough. Yeah,
any
they didn't have the
penguin
retaliatory tariffs. They just had the 10% that penguins still have to pay.
On any of the penguin exports to the United States. But we've still got those baseline tariffs of 10% on goods from dozens of really significant economies around the world into the United States. And that includes the UK, which has been desperately trying to suck up to President Trump and wangle ourselves a personal carve out from that. You've also got the 25% tariffs on steel and on car goods, on the automobile industry. Plus, we've now got this cumulative tariff on Chinese goods, which the White House has confirmed is 145%. And the two biggest economies in the whole world locked into an escalating trade war. So I think that's why you're now seeing, as you mentioned, once again, stock markets starting to fall, because this is a situation of a huge uncertainty, huge unpredictability. No one knows what's going to happen after 90 days. And it appears that part of the reason that the pause was announced was just that there were so many countries trying to say, well, let's talk to the president so he can cut a deal, that there was no way that he could do all of that in a short space of time. So we're left with a situation now where world leaders and many of their biggest companies have literally no idea what the tariffs are going to be on the goods that they send to the US.
And through that, Donald Trump is also somewhat shooting himself in the foot, isn't he? Because the whole point of tariffs is to convince companies as well, or I guess this is the question, isn't it, for Trump? Is he using tariffs as a threat in order to get better trade deals, and he will then remove those tariffs? Or does he, as he said in the election, actually want companies to move all of their production back to the United States? And if they are going to do that, they need certainty, and this isn't really going to provide it, is it?
That's right. President Trump has been speaking since we came on air, actually, at a meeting of his cabinet, and acknowledged, well, there's always going to be transition difficulty. But I think the point is that if, as he has said, the goal is to get businesses to move their production to the US, I mean, companies do not make big decisions about moving factories, switching production upheavals for their workforce when they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone in 3 months' time when this 90-day pause is over. So I think it's going to be very difficult indeed for President Trump to achieve that long-held goal, because companies don't make decisions as big as that when they don't know what's going to happen next. They want to know certainty. They want to plan for years ahead, not wait to see what Donald Trump decides to do when he wakes up tomorrow.
Well, we have quietly had somebody join our studio right during that comment from you, Carole. Tom Rivers is here, American Foreign Radio correspondent based in London. I'll let you catch your breath, Tom. Do you have your breath at this point?
I got my breath. Yeah, it was yet again another commuter tale of woe on the district line. But there you go. But catching the end of Carole, yeah, we can't look at it this week or next week. Maybe not even 6 months, a year or 2 years down the road. The proof will be in the pudding at that point. Can he turn it around? It's a great question. The president alluded to the fact that for 50 years, the Rust Belt has been rusting. I come from a small little town in northeastern Minnesota, Carole. You've probably never been there. A mining town, iron mining town. And it's half the population it was 70 years ago when I was born. So from the mines to the mills, look at Gary, Indiana. It is hollowed out. It is sad. You look at Detroit, half the population it was in 1955. So Trump is saying, I'm going to try something that every president from every different party knew about and was afraid to do anything. Now, he's gone to the toolbox and grabbed a sledgehammer. Look at the trade deal that was supposed to be cut very, very quickly. With Boris. Imagine doing that with 173 nations. How long does that take? How many administrations? So he's kind of doing the wacky thing, which he does, and just saying a blanket policy and saying, to heck with it. Let's go. Let's see what shakes out. And we're living through this history, all of us. If you have a 401k, you know about this and you watch it very, very closely indeed.
Well, and that is the question, Tom, to follow up on that. I mean, were you surprised, given the market reaction, that Donald Trump announced this pause? Because when it comes to everything you're talking about there, that is the policy that Trump has had since the beginning. This is what he wants. Yeah. He wants to dramatically change the way trade is being done. That would suggest you don't need a pause.
Well, it's kind of interesting. You can look at it some ways. He might have been bounced into it because of the bond market. $36 trillion. It rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? You know how many zeros that is?
Incredible
That's our
number.
Great-grandkids. If you're an American, have to pay that off, okay? So it's a heck of a lot. He's also, as you know, the ultimate deal maker, and he's playing, in a sense, divide and conquer. He's saying, look, the real object of this exercise is to change the 5-to-1 trade differential with China. And if you others follow along and cut deals, you're going to be okay. So we'll see what happens. But I say, the proof is in the pudding. 90 days and ticking. How many are coming on board? Vietnam, come on board. India, Korea. The EU says we're going to put a hold on they're not really tariffs, but they were fines, $18 billion worth. And the UK is coming out pretty good. They're just saying, let's sit on our hands, see what shakes out, and go from there. But I think it's absolutely fascinating. And it reminds me of 2008. Some of my friends in the States bought houses then, and they lost 15% overnight. Now, if you have to move from Chicago to Detroit tomorrow for a job, you're going to feel it. You're going to take one heck of a haircut. If you can sit around for 5-6 years, it'll come back. So I think that's what we're going to be looking at, in my own humble opinion, that this eventually will come back, but we sure as heck ain't there yet.
And I would just like to add that when we talk about trade deals, I think the quickest trade deal that's ever been done is in something like 18 months. And the idea that you're going to actually agree 70 or so, maybe these could be simplified somewhat. But the idea that you're going to agree all of those and get all of this sorted out within 90 days, I know he likes to talk about the art of the deal, but those deals to bring peace to the Middle East and Ukraine haven't done too well so far. So I'm not holding my breath on that one.
Well, we will have 90 more days to discuss what happens with Donald Trump and his trade deals. So we'll move on to one of the other promises now, because we wanted to talk about Ukraine, where there is a springtime offensive by Russia quietly underway, even as the U.S. says it supports a ceasefire. And U.S. and Russian officials are meeting in Istanbul today to bring about the normalization of relations. Donald Trump's promise of bringing peace to Ukraine within days of his administration is, well, moving further and further into the rear window at this point. Tom, it has been a busy couple of days today and tomorrow. We've had this coalition of the willing meeting chaired by France and the UK. Yep. You have a Ukraine-NATO contact group with the US included meeting tomorrow. US and Russia today. US and Ukraine doing minerals deals tomorrow.
Yep.
Is any of this actually going to bring us closer to a ceasefire?
This is kind of like, remember on the variety shows where the guy is spinning tin plates on sticks?
It really feels that way.
It feels that way, doesn't it? And throw it into the mix, too. Now Zelensky's going, we've captured 2 Chinese soldiers in the Donbass. So it's all in the hopper. And, well, as you said, Trump says he'd sort this out in 24 hours. Well, we're further down the road, but eventually, again, everything is settled around a table, and this will be settled around a table at some stage. But we're not there yet. But certainly, remember, 2 years ago, Ukraine was your lead item. It's not the lead item anymore. Everybody's tariff crazy. And, that's kind of like, well, sort that out, because what? We've got Gaza still cooking. We've got now this high-level talks between Iran and the U.S. scheduled to happen. So it's almost like Trump says, sort it out. If you can find the missing $100 billion that the U.S. taxpayers thrown in your way, Mr. Zelensky, that would be lovely. But he basically is saying, look, we got other fish to fry out there. So, sort yourself out. Stop the killing on both sides. We've heard that repeatedly from him.
We have heard that repeatedly, certainly. But to that point, Carole, is Donald Trump either distracted by tariffs right now, or is there something to this idea that he just wants things to quieten down so that negotiators can actually get something done? We do seem to be in something of a holding pattern at the moment.
Look, I think he is distracted by the huge upheavals caused by those tariffs. But I'm not sure I'm as optimistic that any of these talks are going to lead to any kind of a deal, because so far, President Putin has shown absolutely no desire to stop the fighting at every stage when there was a big focus on the talks between US delegations, Russians, US and Ukrainians. President Putin appeared at one stage to say that he was ready for some partial ceasefire in terms of attacks on energy infrastructure, which left him free to send missiles and drone attacks onto blocks of flats, continuing to kill people. He was quite keen to have some kind of ceasefire in the Black Sea, but that was so that he could get his own shipping protected and getting his own shipments through. And at the moment, there is absolutely no sign that President Putin is ready to sue for peace. He has already retaken most of the territory of Kursk, a bit of Russia, which the Ukrainians had taken. President Zelensky has said he fears he's now massing 67,000 troops along the border to try to take the Ukrainian city of Sumy. What President Putin can do is just continue to pour money and troops into this. He is making gains. It is pretty slow, but he's shown no indication whatsoever that he's ready to sign up for a deal. And I just fear all these talks about a coalition of the willing. That was a coalition of the willing nations that were prepared to provide some kind of peacekeeping reassurance force if there was a deal. And a deal, to me, seems about as far off as it was when President Trump said he was going to solve it all in 24 hours.
A deal does seem pretty far off, Tom, at this point. And to those points about Russia, do you get the sense that there might be a point where Donald Trump gets more aggressive and does say that he's had enough when it comes to Vladimir Putin? Because at this point, we haven't, to Carole's point, we haven't really seen a dramatic shift from Vladimir Putin. He's talked about a ceasefire in theory, but his demands are basically the same demands he's had at the start of the war. He wants a full demilitarization of Ukraine.
Again, as President Trump said, Russia holds all of the best cards right now, and nothing is going to change that fact on the ground militarily. We hear the fact that, we talked about potentially 20 to 30,000 maybe French and British troops on the 600-mile line. That's a long line. That's about a third of Wembley. And you get these 10 miles. I'll take the... No, it's not going to work. Coalition of the willing, think back to the days of Iraq. When the U.S. is leading it, others follow in line and follow in step. I think back to the 80s when part of my beat was to cover the defense and foreign ministers' meetings at NATO. NATO policy is 99% U.S. policy. Now, sometimes there's some little wiggle room, and you can have issues over the Lance missile at the time, or, fill in the blank various things. But basically, if the U.S. says yes, everybody is on board. And if you have a coalition of the willing, and the U.S. is saying, look, we want some minerals, we don't want to get any boots on the soil, that coalition of the willing is going to look very, very weak. And Putin knows that. He certainly knows that. And if we keep stretching this out, the last people left in Kursk will be taken care of. And he might set his sights on Odessa, saying we want the last square inch of your shoreline with Ukraine to be in our hands. So you're absolutely right. He's in no mode right now to go fast. He's slowly gaining on the ground.
And if I could just add, Tom talks about Iraq. So many nations are absolutely scarred by their experiences in Iraq and where they ended up being bogged down there. So many nations, including the UK, the US and others, lost soldiers there. And you are not going to see those, the UK, other European nations committing troops into a scenario where there is no agreed peace and where their opponent is not just an insurgent group like you had, or insurgent groups, a whole network of them in Iraq, but Russia, the second biggest military superpower in the world.
Just finally to follow that up, Tom, though, when you do speak of Russia and Putin holding all the cards, and that's certainly true militarily speaking, the wild card, therefore, is, of course, Donald Trump, because then the question for me is, does he actually have an interest in a ceasefire?
Yes.
Because he is the only one, if Russia is holding the cards, that could say, I don't care that you're holding all the cards. I want this war to stop.
If we're in Chapter 10 right now, thumb through to Chapter 14, and Trump wants working relationship with Moscow. He wants to sort out, he doesn't want to think about Ukraine tomorrow. He wants to say, how can we, continue deals like we had 3.5 years ago with Moscow? So yes, the larger political game is Washington and Moscow, and of course, and a glance to Beijing as well. Fascinating over the years to see now how this has evolved under policy of Biden. And Biden pushed Moscow and Beijing closer and closer together. Look at the whole Southern Hemisphere. Look at the BRICS movement. Look at the dollar. Is that going to be a reserve currency in 10 years, 20 years? I don't know. But the world is very, very different and looking more and more multipolar.
Carole, just finally, perhaps on that, if the world is looking more multipolar, what is Europe's role in that? Keir Starmer is trying to find some kind of role on Ukraine for Europe as well.
Well, I think what we have seen is that the European NATO members have... you would have to count this as one of Donald Trump's successes in terms of his agenda. They have all acknowledged that they've got to pay a lot more themselves to pay for their own defence and to pay collectively into NATO coffers. And I think that is a significant shift. I think the other one that is happening is that there is a growing realisation that, just as Tom was saying, so often in the past, nations have agreed to cooperate alongside the US, with the US being by far the biggest part of any force. They are realising that their there may have to be operations which they themselves will have to undertake. And they're going to have to reconfigure their entire defence industries and their forces so that they can cooperate with one another, because what they have realised is that they may not be able to rely on the United States when it comes to, for example, keeping the peace along that Eastern European, very, very vulnerable border.
Well, speaking of the Europeans trying to still influence the US, Tom, I wanted to turn to a slightly different aspect of this story, the information war, if you will, because Greece's Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, welcomed the right-wing American outlet Breitbart into his offices in Athens. French President Emmanuel Macron has appeared on Fox News back in February, and I wonder what we make of these efforts by Europeans to still appeal to American voters. Are they appealing to American voters, or are they trying to appeal to American presidents?
Probably both. Probably both. But again, if you can't beat them, join them. They know the writing on the wall. Look at the viewership figures for MSNBC today. It's tanking. CNN used to be this wonderful thing when we hit the road and you'd be in your hotels. CNN is dying on the vine right now. And the other mainstream networks, they're trying to hang in with their fingernails right now. So yes, it is part and parcel. And look at the mood music under the leadership. Look at the recent election in Germany. The people wanted change. Look at Macron's ratings right now. Look what happened to Marine Le Pen. Look what's happening in the ascension in Hungary. So yes, there is a real, if you will, out of step, out of phase rift between the people, the great unwashed of Europe, and their governments now. And globalization is swirling around the toilet right now. It is not the same game that was being pitched 5 years ago.
Carole, do you get the sense then, to those points from Tom, that European leaders, those centrist ones like a Macron, like a Mitsotakis, are realizing that they have a problem in how to speak to the right?
Well, I think it's not just how do they speak to the right. It's the knowledge that the only media outlets that President Trump is likely to listen to are Breitbart, Fox News. You've now got this One American News, which is slightly to the right of Fox News. And what they know is that not just Donald Trump himself, but many of the key figures around him, I mean, actually come from that. You know, Pete Hegseth was a Fox News host. That is where the power lies in the United States. If they want to get their message across about where their country stands on various of the issues of the day, and they want to try and influence Donald Trump and the people around him, that's what they've got to do. That's what they've got to do their interviews. They can give it to CNN and it will just be dismissed as fake news from the mainstream media. And they know that the media landscape has shifted quite dramatically in the US, to the extent that we've seen some of the more traditional outlets actually barred from the White House press pool, those correspondents not being called in at these little ad hoc media moments that Donald Trump likes to give, usually a couple of times a day, by the way. And so
very talkative.
They're facing up to the realities of the media landscape and where their messages are going to get the most impact.
Well, we do want to take a turn to something completely different, just finally, for our panel today, because the trendy word in tourism these days is over-tourism. But if we are going to be trying to get rid of overcrowding, the question then becomes which tourists to get rid of. Luckily, the Daily Telegraph has done some of the work for us by polling experts on which tourists are the most disliked and most liked in European nations. The answer depends on where you ask. The Brits are generally welcomed in France, but the bachelor parties are despised in Spain. Americans are generally seen as enthusiastic but disrespectful. I do wonder where they get that from. Tom, do we sometimes, when we're abroad, I have to ask you as a fellow American here, do we get embarrassed for our own nation's stereotypes, or do we just sort of lean into them?
We kind of do. It's difficult to say that. But, when we travel around, I found, treat others like you want to be treated, and with senior producers, with senior correspondents, with fixers to taxi drivers, and you'll get by okay. But yeah, you'll see some Americans doing, and really not out of ordinary, but just asking some kind of dumb questions sometimes, and it's just the way it is.
And that's it. Do you kind of cringe at that?
Yeah,
or do you
do, just because I've been here long enough. But the first time you're here from Philly and you want to go to Leicester Square, because that's what it looks like, right? Or yes. I heard I can buy a new radio on Tottenham Court Road. But that's it's just the silly things
with some Worcestershire.
The Brits do the same thing in America. But yeah, you wince, but you kind of learn the rules as long as decades you've been here. Yeah.
Carole, I have to say, when it comes to those British stereotypes, I've been in Lisbon and Prague over the past year. I did have some sympathy for what the Spanish were saying about the bachelor party side, the stag do's, the hen do's of the British. Is that something you are embarrassed about, or do you lean into those as well when you're abroad?
Look, I generally try and avoid these national stereotypes because, as I'm sure your audience listening, some of them will be infuriated by it. But I think that it is the vogue for huge stag and hen parties that has basically given the Brits a bad name. I think we've learned perhaps that it's a good idea not just to shout in English very loudly in bars. I mean, come on, not many of us really do that anymore.
I'm sorry to say I was just in Lisbon last week with a group of about 20 loud English drunken men singing Oasis's Wonderwall, if I remember correctly.
I think the problem is that when you get a large collection of young people enjoying a big occasion, that maybe they're not on their best behavior. And I'm now going to have to hold my hands up because our son has just arrived in Portugal on his stag weekend. So I've so far seen a picture of them politely sitting around. Maybe it wasn't lemonade in the glasses, but I personally think that it is the hen and stag parties which have just really, at a time when we Brits just might have been trying to convince the rest of Europe and the rest of the world that, maybe we're not all people who lie around and demand pints of beer and fish and chips wherever we go. But I think the hen and stag party industry, which is what it is now, has really set back that cause quite badly.
Just finally, Tom, I do think it's also fascinating in this survey how we kind of also bring our own stereotypes to a survey like this. For example, the Germans were disliked by the Greeks for, I suppose, obvious reasons, given the economic situation. The Spaniards generally found them to be polite and interested in their culture. The Italians found them pedantic, rule-obsessed, and big drinkers.
Well, let's...
Which one is it?
I don't know. Speaking of which, it's been on my bucket list for years. You guys have probably been there, but now that I'm semi-retired, I am going to go to Munich for Oktoberfest because I've always wanted to go there. And maybe,
the ultimate big drinking stereotype.
And maybe act like the typical American there. Yes, thank you very much.
Tom Rivers and Carole Walker, thank you very much for joining us. That is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. A big thanks also to Andrew Mueller at the Delphi Economic Forum. Today's show was produced by Tom Webb, researched by Francesca Jilks. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu. I'm Chris Chermak here in London. The Monocle Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.